Here it is, the console that I grew up with, the Super Nintendo. I have many fond memories of this console, and some I'm, well, not so fond of. As a kid, it was just me, my sister, my cousins, the Super Nintendo, and a big brown cardboard box filled with 37 games. So today, I'd like you all to join me as I take a trip down memory lane and look back at these games. Some of these games aged like wine, some like milk, and some like vodka, meaning you don't really remember much about them. All you do know is that you had pants at one time. So without further ado, and in no particular order, please don't make me rank these, be nice, I give you the big brown box of my childhood. Now, a majority of these games were licensed games. Whether they were based off of a movie, cartoon, or a book, these were games that were safe bets for my parents. They went off of things they knew I liked, saw a game for it, and bought it for me. Sometimes they were pretty good. For instance, Speedy Gonzales Los Gatos Banditos, or as I like to call it, Sonic on Super Nintendo. No, really, anyone who thinks Sonic couldn't be done on Super Nintendo needs to realize that it was attempted with Speedy here. It's a fairly noble effort, minus all the loop-de-loops and pulls and your shoes be looking cool. My sister played this game more than me. Sometimes my parents' safe bets were pretty bad. You'd find me touching the controller sooner with Speedy than with our next game, Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally. This one is fast-paced like Speedy, but more in the I can't control this pecker for the life of me kind of sense. Not only do you have that coyote hot on your tail feather, but the platforming is really janky. The animation is nice though. If it wasn't the Looney Tunes being pulled out of that box, then I usually played a game based off of a superhero or Saturday morning cartoon. X-Men Mutant Apocalypse was my unintentional introduction to the Mega Man X games. For starters, this gem was made by Capcom, had the intense and rocking soundtrack that I would later fall in love with in Mega Man, and the explosive action and satisfying tight crunch controls that made me a Capcom loyalist. Well, until recent events. Playing as your favorite X-Men character was very satisfying as a child, unless you like Storm, or Jean Grey, or Nightcrawler, or Rogue. But they have Gambit. I mean, I'll give Mutant Apocalypse some credit. They at least tried to give us varying styles of combat with each character. Look, as much as I love this next game, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, though fun, clearly just recolored the Red Ranger for each of them. I'm actually surprised they bothered to give each Ranger their weapon. Sure, it's repetitive in most spots, but the soundtrack and the boss fights really stand out for me. Plus, the Megazord fights are really well executed. They are slow, but they don't feel clunky, and they make a great finale to the game. Zack Sprite is pretty racist though. Speaking of clunky, I had the disservice of playing an entire game of these Megazord fights, but unfortunately, they weren't any good. Ultraman Towards the Future, also made by Bandai, is just boring. In Power Rangers, there was a build-up to the final boss battles, and since it was a new battle mechanic, it helped shake up the game's standard beat-em-up formula. Here it's just wait for your strongest attack to charge while you slug around and punch these giant Muppets. You've probably noticed a trend with these superhero games. They fit quite well in the arcade beat-em-up genre. And one of them has a particular crunch. Batman Returns. I'm serious. Every punch, kick, and slam sounds absolutely painful. It's some of the best sound effects on the Super Nintendo. The game gets relentless in its difficulty. This muscle-bound pea-brain can knock you on your bad ass with a single punch. Catwoman makes you look like a pussy. And sticking to tradition, Batman's platforming skills is not without the trademark broomstick shoved up his ass. He's very stiff and not meant for quick maneuvers, but it is satisfying to pull off some of these badass moves. This one is so broken, they decided to strip you of some health to keep you from spamming it. Well played. But hey, maybe you want to bring a friend, or in my case, a relative into the mix. Well, you can with Captain America and the Avengers. You might want to mute your TV though, or at least disable the voices. You can play as Captain America, Iron Man, Gay Hawkeye, or Dr. Manhattan. Oh wait, that's just Vision. Honestly, if it wasn't for the co-op, I'd skip this one. If I wanted enjoyable co-op, I stuck with Super Smash TV. Are you familiar with the movie The Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger? If you are, Then Super Smash TV's concept of killing hundreds of people, robots, and monsters for the world's amusement is definitely an addicting premise. It's an arcade game which demands only one thing from you: shoot everything. You will be blowing up a lot of things, collecting power-ups, and at the end of it all, win big cash prizes, after you wipe all the messy blood off, of course. My mother was usually quite liberal with me playing games with guns in them, so how this one slipped her radar, I'll never know. But it was fun, addicting, and my cousin never had to sit to the side and twiddle his thumbs when we popped this gem in. So thanks, Dad, for the awesome 16-bit bloodbath. What I'll never thank you for, though, was this next stunt. Like I said, if I knew the source material and there was a game, I had the game if Pops could find it. I grew up with Home Improvement and still find it one of the best sitcoms on television. The grunts, the yells, the hidey-ho neighbor. It's one of the best examples of 90s slapstick. The game that spawned off this product, though, is a piece of shit. Time travel with dinosaurs, mummies, and robots should be exciting. Home Improvement Power Tool Pursuit is just dull and annoying. You're constantly doing this shit, the level designs are confusing and not well thought out, and there's no giant mutant Bob Vila as the final boss. Or maybe there is, I don't know. I didn't bother to finish this trash. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful for my parents even giving me a game to play in the first place. Come to think of it, Mom was only nasty against guns and games if I was pointing it towards other humans. She had no problem if I was pointing them at, say, a dinosaur. In fact, that's one of the reasons I became such a big fan of the Turok games. In the case of the Super Nintendo, I shot dinosaurs in Jurassic Park 2, The Chaos Continues. I really don't think this is based on the second movie, but this 2D shooter with dinosaurs did have some epic moments. The mountain of pterodactyls, the volcanic caverns with angry triceratopsi? What's the plural word for this? And of course, the T-Rex chase. You do shoot people as well, but the dinosaurs managed to cloud my mother's judgment, so it slipped through the cracks. And I'll be honest, most of the games I've mentioned so far have been pleasant surprises. I didn't expect much from Home Improvement, but got even less than that. These next two games, I mean, they could have been just fine, they just weren't. So I won't blame my folks for neither The Adventures of Yogi Bear or We're Back, A Dinosaur Story. With We're Back, the biggest problem is that you're just too damn big. You're an easy target for enemies and projectiles. The platforms are sometimes too small to feel secure standing on, and everyone's favorite rock-throwing technique is here and as useless as ever. As for Yogi Bear, it's just nauseating. Whoever was in charge of this game's camera clearly hated kids. Aside from that, Yogi slips and slides all over the place like he's in some dire need of some Charmin. Also, the game just kinda happens. No characters, no plot whatsoever, just levels. Very bad levels. Another unpleasant surprise I got was the Pagemaster. I mean, I guess I was expecting something mediocre like the movie, but what I got instead was a game where right off the bat you can't see shit. Come to think of it, I may miss quite a few things about retro games, but dying in 1-2 hits certainly isn't one of them. From pirates to knights to bats, oh come on. You really have to memorize every aspect of these levels to be adequate at them, let alone get good. So yeah, a couple of these were real flubs, and most were just kinda decent. But man, when Mom and Dad got it right, they really got it right. The Disney games on the Super Nintendo are some of my all-time favorites. I remember getting so giddy just to see that Disney Interactive logo on both The Jungle Book and The Lion King. These games were hard as nails, but I had a lot more patience when I was a child, and came real close to beating them. King Louie's level is still a pain in the neck to trek through, and these rolling rocks I do believe are my first experience of throwing a controller. I was never big on this Earthworm Jim level design, and I may touch on this for another video to go more in depth, but not knowing for sure where I could and couldn't interact with always seemed unfair for me. Visually, the games were great, and musically they had me humdinging along, but they lacked the game polish that I found in what most will disagree with me on, Aladdin. I often feel that Capcom's Disney games for the NES are praised perhaps a bit too much, and their SNES titles are overshadowed a bit too much. Capcom's Aladdin feels like an experience. There is something super satisfying about the acrobatic gameplay style that makes the Genesis one just seem generic. The colors don't seem washed out, they really pop. I feel like I'm in control of every jump ahead of the lawman, every swing ahead of the sword, stealing only what I can't afford. Capcom was also behind another game which I played religiously as a child, and still pop in every now and then, The Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse. This short but sweet platformer has aspects of Mega Man, Bionic Commando, and even Moonwalker. There's this certain Disney charm that the game manages to capture right from the first level, the Beanstalk. And whether you're log rolling on tomatoes or putting out that fire that Billy Joel started, you'll be going through this magical quest with a smile on your face. Oh, I almost forgot. These are technically Disney games as well, and hoo boy are they awesome. Super Star Wars and Super Return of the Jedi. I didn't play Super Empire Strikes Back until I became an adult, and good thing too, because that one will certainly put some hair on your peaches. But I do have fond memories with these faithful 16-bit adaptations. Not only did they have side-scrolling levels, but first-person shooting, Mode 7 vehicle sections, and whatever the hell you consider this garbage to be. Want to take on the Rancor as Han Solo? You got it. Want to tear through the Cantina guns blazing as Chewie? Why not? Want to blow up the Death Star as Princess Leia? Sorry, you can't actually do that one. You can whip the shit out of Jabba. Overall, they are great sci-fi adventures that let you feel like you're in the movie and along for the ride. And then there's The Rocketeer. This was one of about 3 games I had in that big brown box that I popped in, played for about 3 minutes and said, nope, and plopped right back in that box while I played something more exciting, bizarre, and enjoyable. Something like Excalibur 2097. Want a game that perfectly embodies a cheesy over-the-top 90s action movie, complete with Coke cans, techno music, and impressive visuals? This is one of those games that probably hasn't aged all too well, but I do remember having fun slashing through all the mutants and monsters while playing as a kid. It was also one of the first games to have a soundtrack that I could dance to. Combat was a bit frustrating at times, but as a kid, I never considered it to be the game's fault, and kept pressing on until the credits rolled, because I wasn't a whiny entitled bitch. Alright, let's move on to some sports games. I didn't play that many, but I do recall my dad playing these types of games until he was lost in Azeroth. He was a religious buyer of Madden starting with 94 up until 2014, NHLPA hockey, which I never touched, Ken Griffey Jr. winning run, which was simple and straightforward, George Foreman's KO Boxing, which was the game I got while I envied those who got to experience Super Punch-Out, and my favorite of the bunch, Super Tennis. I don't know why, there was just something charming about the calming simplicity this game gave off. Before Mario Tennis came and became my go-to sports video game, Super Tennis held a special place in my childhood. And there was another game that as a kid I considered to be a sports game, and then I grew up and realized it was really a game of its own genre, Pilot Wings. I remember the music being some of the most calming and ambient on the Super Nintendo. Alright, we'll get to you shortly. But I just flat out sucked at this one. Oh, you fickle mistress! Flying controls were never my specialty, especially if I wasn't flying in an arcade shoot-'em-up. Luckily, I had one of those to give me some excitement in space. Super R-Type may be hard as nails, but it was addicting, and I would constantly just gear up, prepare for launch, and go back to blasting the aliens. It's a game that taught me how to use tunnel vision, which I recently used to destroy this turdsicle from Cuphead. You can't get hit, so you have to dodge this onslaught of bullets headed your way. It was definitely my first experience with a bullet hell, which by the way, this shit ain't got nothing on some of the crazy sadistic what even is this? Never beat the game to this day, but that starting launch into space always gets me pumped up for another galactic battle. For some reason, I considered games in space to be tough as nails when I was a kid. The Super Star Wars games, Super R-Type, and even the racing game I had growing up, F-Zero. Jeez. I may love intense speed, the hypnotic visuals, and the 16-bit glory of a soundtrack, but I lost count at how many times I blew the hell up. Imagine my surprise when I later discovered that most racing games don't have game overs. Still, this game is much more forgiving than this iconic disc from hell, although this ridiculous jump is forever scarred into my memory. And continuing the trend of tough science fiction Super Nintendo games, we have my first RPG I ever played. Now, I didn't really get into RPGs until roughly the Game Boy Advance, so my first experiences with them were rather lukewarm. It took me well into adulthood until I tried out the popular ones. Final Fantasy II, 4, Final Fantasy 6, shit. Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, Breath of Fire. Okay. So what was my first RPG then? Robotrek. I can't for the life of me remember why or how I got this game, but there was a certain charm about it. You see this little radish head? He may be the main character, but in combat, you are in control of these robots that you build. Arm them with an axe, a sword, a gun, some rockets, a shield, and many more really cool things, though you have to choose your robot carefully. Later on, you can build some more robots to add some variety to your strategy, but if you're a stupid kid like I was, you'd struggle making progress of any kind with your first robot. I don't remember much about this game aside from a crab battle of some sort, and I would like to give it another go, but this game is going for some hefty prices at the moment. Ah well, It was certainly more enjoyable than the other RPG I played as a kid, Draken. The only positive I can give you about this game is the title screen. Stupid Dragon duped me. This game is way too complex for my tiny brain. Though the idea of a first-person fantasy adventure was ambitious, I had enough trouble getting everyone to go across the damn drawbridge. Other times I'd wander too far and shit! Having a dragon on your cover is a cheap move. I fell for it again with Dragon's Lair for the Super Nintendo. Once again, the title screen has some of my favorite music out of any video game, but the game itself just meanders in mediocrity. I am thankful that it was this game that I got to experience instead of the NES version though. I guess if I wanted to have a good old fantasy adventure, I had to rely on Nintendo to show me how it's done. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, my first Zelda, and perhaps one of the greatest fantasy games of all time. I'm constantly bouncing back and forth between this and Ocarina as the definitive Zelda experience. Both games have this fluid blend of story and gameplay, and when that triumphant music hits upon leaving the sanctuary, you feel so valiant. There are some clever puzzles and secrets, but none of that ridiculous cryptic crap from the NES Zeldas. The world of Hyrule is inviting, rather than punishing, and the locations and obstacles encountered along the way make the experience all the more memorable. The bosses, the items, the dungeons, it's all wrapped up in this masterpiece on the Super Nintendo. And Nintendo continued to impress me with their heavy hitters. Welcome to the jungle, everyone. It's time to play a game that will always put a smile on my face. We're hitting the country, ladies and gentlemen. It's on like Donkey Kong. I knew from the first days of playing this gem that I would have difficulty putting it down. Blasting through barrels, jumping on a minecart, riding a freaking rhino, fighting the blizzard, fleeing from the psychotic beaver on wheels, the game just constantly throws something new at you without forcing you to adjust to a new mechanic. The levels were gorgeous, the music was ambient and atmospheric, pushing the Super Nintendo to its absolute limits, and resulting in something I have yet to hear come even remotely close from the Sega Genesis. The 3D model renders, which has aged better than every single N64 game, and one of the best final boss battles of all time. This was gaming at its peak for me. It was challenging but rewarding, and it wasn't until a few years later that I discovered its two sequels. Those are great too, but the original Donkey Kong Country was my banana and butter. And now it's time for the man of the hour, my childhood incarnate. Oh yeah, I can't forget about you. Super Castlevania 4, baby! I grew up thinking this was another member of the Nintendo family, but I was wrong. It belongs to this shithole company. Regardless, at the time, Konami made some awesome games, and Super Castlevania 4 was something I loved sinking my fangs into. The fluid movement of the whip, the intense eerie atmosphere, and by God, the music! I love this gothic adventure from beginning to end. Few Castlevanias come close to its glory. Ladies and gentlemen, Super Mario. Regardless of how much I love the other game series, only Mario has been able to give me such a sense of joy that I cannot put into exact words. But before I gush about the Mario games of my childhood, I should first address the bad Mario game. Yes, that's right, a bad Mario game. And I think the idea is fine, and my parents' intentions to educate me using the beloved Mario characters was a noble effort. Still, Mario is Missing goes a little too far with the educational text. It gets monotonous real fast, and half the time I have no idea what the hell is happening. Okay, so now's the time to gush? Alrighty, let's go! Super Mario All-Stars is a game that just blows your mind every time you try to explain it. 3 of the finest platformers of the NES, 1 unreleased hard mode of the original, and it's all re-glorified in 16-bit with beautiful backdrops, music, and smoothed out gameplay. It's something I would love to see again. Just like the Insane Trilogy and now the Ignited Trilogy, I would love for Super Mario Bros. 1 through 3 plus Lost Levels to be remade using the new Super Mario Bros. Engine for the Nintendo Switch. Don't get me wrong, I love the classic NES versions, but the Super Nintendo Trilogy is just a sublime way to play. 4 games, 1 cart, hours of enjoyment. Hours. And it's time to conclude with the first game I ever played, Super Mario World. Starting at the age of 1, you could say I was raised on Dinosaur Island. I know when it comes to game mechanics and laying the foundation of the franchise, Super Mario Bros. 3 is the superior game. But for me, mainly aesthetically, Super Mario World is my favorite Mario game. The boss battles are better, Yoshi is such a joy, Star Road and the Special World are great secrets. The way the entire island just twists and turns makes each new exit a genuine surprise. The music is nostalgic bliss, and it has some of my favorite Mario enemies of all time, the Rexes. Come on, you should know I'm a dinosaur glutton by now. I owe Nintendo my firstborn for the glory of Super Mario World alone, but really, I consider the Super Nintendo one of my favorite consoles to this day, right behind the PlayStation 2 and just above the Game Boy Advance. If you want to see other videos paying tribute to the games I grew up with on the following consoles, then just let me know and I'll get to work on them. Thanks for watching, and be sure to let me know some of your favorite Super Nintendo games you had growing up.